On my birthday, my daughter looked me in the eye and said, "You're just a shell now, Dad. I wish you'd stop pretending to be here." Then she turned her back and left me sitting alone at the table. I didn't say a word, because I couldn't. The silence had taken everything. It started one morning like any other. Birds outside my window. A kettle whistling in the kitchen. My daughter humming the same lullaby I used to sing to her when she was little. And then nothing. A strange ringing. Then a void. Like someone had flipped a switch and drained the color out of sound. I thought it would pass. That it was a cold, an infection, maybe just age catching up. But the doctors were direct and cruel in their honesty. It's permanent. Nerve damage. There's no going back. No going back. I didn't cry. I just nodded. What else could I do? But inside I was breaking. It wasn't the silence that hurt the most. It was what the silence revealed. At first my daughter tried. She sat by my side, held my hand, mouthed words with exaggerated care. She bought books about sign language, printed charts, wrote notes. But I could see it. The shift. The slow, painful shift from love to obligation. She stopped touching my hand when she spoke. Then she stopped writing things down. Then she stopped speaking to me at all. She talked around me, over me, as if I were some old piece of furniture. The worst part? I watched her cry once, late at night. She thought I was asleep. Tears fell silently as she whispered, "I can't do this. He's gone. He's gone and he's not coming back." And after that, she stopped trying. No more notes. No more soft looks. Just a routine, a schedule. Feed Dad, wash his clothes, put him in front of the TV with captions. And every time I opened my mouth to try and speak, I was met with a gentle smile that didn't reach her eyes. Or complete indifference. I was still alive. But to her, I was no longer me. I wanted to scream, to tell her I was still here, that I remembered her first word, that I remembered how I held her after her mother died, that I still saw the girl who once said I was her hero. But silence, it swallows heroes and buries them in plain sight. So I learned to smile, to nod, to fade, until the day the silence gave me back my hearing. But by then, I wasn't sure I wanted her to know, because something deeper had gone deaf between us. And maybe that couldn't be healed at all. Friends, let me pause for a second. Please tell me in the comments where are you listening from. Have you ever experienced anything like this in your own life? If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing and sharing it with someone. That small act helps us grow and reach more people who may need to hear these words. Now let's continue. The world has a cruel way of adjusting without you. At first, everything moves. Slowly, people speak louder, gesture more, glance at you to make sure you understand. But eventually, they stop trying. That's when the real loneliness begins. My daughter adapted to my silence far faster than I ever could. She stopped waiting for me to keep up. Conversations around the dinner table became lively again, but I wasn't part of them. I was just their hands, folded, eyes scanning mouths for some clue, some trace of meaning. And when that failed, I just pretended. I smiled at the right moments. I laughed when they laughed, but inside, I was vanishing. It started with small things. A question asked in the next room unanswered, followed by a sigh. An invitation I didn't hear that no one bothered repeating. A story told with me sitting beside her as if I were invisible. Eventually, they didn't even try to include me. Family dinners, weekend plans, big decisions, they all happened without me. And the worst part? I don't think it was intentional. It was simply easier for everyone to act like I wasn't really there, because acknowledging me meant acknowledging the weight of what they'd lost. I became Dad, the one who doesn't hear, rather than Dad, the man who raised us. A shadow, a duty, a silent figure occupying space. I'd walk into a room and find them talking in hushed tones. Not to be secretive, just because I didn't matter in the conversation anymore. They would laugh, eyes sparkling with life, and I'd sit quietly, smiling like a ghost in his own home. Once my daughter was on the phone with a friend. I was in the hallway. She didn't see me. And she said something that still echoes in my bones. I love him, but it's like living with a statue. It's exhausting. A statue. That word clung to me. Not broken, not grieving, not struggling. Just lifeless. So I tried to fix it. I watched hours of silent films to get better at reading lips. I practiced sounds, even if I couldn't hear them, hoping to remember how speech felt in my mouth. I learned signs with stiff fingers and aching hands, but none of that mattered, because by then she had already stopped believing I could come back to her. She had found her new normal, and it didn't include me. I began to dread the mornings, not because of the silence, but because of what came with it, the reminder that I was still here and no one truly noticed. They brought me food, folded my clothes, left me sitting in front of the television like a tired pet. People think silence is peaceful, but there's a kind of silence that suffocates, one that doesn't just steal your hearing. It steals your place in the world, and mine was vanishing day by day. I didn't expect them to save me, but I never imagined they'd forget me while I was still breathing. At some point, I stopped hoping to hear again. Instead, I learned to watch. I studied the movement of lips the way an artist studies shadows. I memorized the way my daughter formed her vowels, how she tilted her chin slightly when she was tired, how she pursed her lips when she lied. It was my way of staying alive in a world that had pushed me into the corner, a silent observer, a man stitched into the background of his own life. Lip reading became my secret weapon, not because I wanted to spy, but because it was the only way I could feel connected, even if that connection was one-sided. At first it felt innocent. I'd sit quietly in the living room and follow conversations from afar. I watched the words dance across mouths like waves across a distant shore, and in that dance I found tiny anchors of belonging. But secrets, even quiet ones, have teeth. One afternoon I sat in the garden. My daughter was nearby, speaking with a friend on the patio. They didn't see me. Maybe they forgot I was there. Or maybe they just assumed I couldn't understand. That's when I saw it. Her friend asked something about me. I couldn't make out the question entirely, just the word burden. And my daughter laughed, not cruelly, not even bitterly. It was the laugh of someone tired, someone who didn't realize they were already breaking someone else's heart. I just feel like I'm babysitting a memory, she said. A memory. Not a man. Not her father. A leftover trace of someone who used to be useful. I didn't move. Didn't flinch. But inside me, something folded in on itself. The next time it happened, it was worse. She was arguing with her fiancé in the hallway. I was sitting at the kitchen table, out of sight. He wanted to move, take a job in another state. She hesitated. I can't just leave him, she said. But then she added, not because I want to stay, because I have to. That word had struck deeper than I expected. I had become obligation. A chore, the heavy end of a rope she never asked to carry. I had raised her with everything I had, stayed up when she was sick, sold tools to pay for her school books, slept in hospital chairs when her mother died, and now I was a weight, something she tolerated with gritted teeth and distant eyes. I never meant to overhear these things. But how could I unsee them once I had? The mouth doesn't lie the way the eyes can. And what I saw in her mouth, again and again, was fatigue and quiet resentment. There's a cruelty in watching someone you love speak freely, thinking you're not watching, and realizing that this honesty only exists in your absence. I started to withdraw, not because I was angry, but because every sentence I read chipped away at something I used to believe was unbreakable. My daughter loved me, but she didn't see me anymore. Not the man I was, not the father who once carried her on his shoulders beneath the stars. She saw the shell, the silence, the task. So I sat, and I watched, and I waited, until one day the world returned, like a whisper through a locked door, and with it came a choice, to let her keep believing I couldn't hear, or to find out just how far her words would go, when she thought I still couldn't listen. There are moments that split your life in two before you heard the words, and after. It was late evening. The sky outside had turned the color of ash, and the kitchen light spilled softly across the wooden floor. I sat in my chair by the hallway, half shrouded in shadow, not hidden, just unnoticed, as always. To them I was harmless, silent, out of reach. I'd come in quietly, cradling a cup of tea, careful not to let it clink against the saucer. I didn't want to interrupt. I didn't want to draw attention. I only wanted to hear her voice, the voice that used to sing to me from the back seat as a child, that used to wrap around me like warmth in winter. But what I heard this time was something else entirely. She was standing by the sink, arms crossed, her fiancé leaning against the fridge. They were mid-conversation voices, low, tense. I could see it in the tightness of her mouth. I could read every syllable like it had been carved in stone. I can't do this much longer, she said. He's a burden. The words struck like a match in my chest. I felt it burn before I even registered it. She kept going. He just sits there. He doesn't even try anymore. He's like a ghost in the house. I'm not putting my life on hold for a deaf old man. A deaf old man. That's what I had become in her eyes. Not her father. Not the man who had built her crib with trembling hands. Not the man who once chased monsters from under her bed, or kissed every scraped knee like it was sacred. Just a deaf old man. I didn't drop the cup. I didn't move. I just stood there, swallowed by the walls, my presence as invisible as the sound that used to fill my life. She didn't see me, and even if she had, I don't think it would have mattered, because the truth was already out. Not shouted, not screamed, just whispered calmly as if it were a simple fact. There was no malice in her tone. That's what made it worse. It wasn't rage, it wasn't pain, it was weariness. Exhausted love that had quietly given up. And when love gives up, it doesn't always slam the door. Sometimes it just fades out and leaves you wondering when exactly it died. I stood there for a while, long after she had gone to bed. The tea grew cold in my hands. I didn't drink it. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my room staring at the ceiling, hearing her words over and over again, the cadence, the rhythm, the weight of them. He's a burden. Deaf old man. I'm not putting my life on hold. They echoed not in my ears, but in my bones. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to hate her. Because what if she was right? What if I was a burden? What if the man I used to be had quietly vanished without anyone noticing? Even me. No, some part of me still lived, still remembered. And that part wasn't done yet. I didn't know what I was going to do. Not yet. But I knew this. She thought I was deaf. She thought I was broken. She thought I wasn't watching. And maybe that gave me the one thing I never expected to have again, the power to choose what came next. I didn't move, not when she said it, not after. Not even when the house felt quiet again and the shadows lengthened around me like silent witnesses. Because what could I say? What could a man like me do who had once held the world in his arms, and now couldn't even hold the attention of his own daughter? I stood there, cup still in hand, lips pressed into a line, heart thrashing like a wild animal inside a cage made of bone. My body was still, but inside, everything burned. The thing is, when you lose one of your senses, the others sharpen. People say that as if it's comforting, like a gift wrapped in tragedy. But they never talk about the emotional senses, how the heart compensates when it's been silenced, how pain vibrates louder when you have no other sound to distract you, how loneliness becomes its own kind of thunder. That night, after they went to sleep, I sat at the edge of my bed and stared at the door. It was cracked open just slightly, like a crooked mouth that had started to speak and then changed its mind. I thought about the times I had stood outside her door when she was little, just listening to her breathe. I thought about the nights I'd carried her to bed after she fell asleep in the car, the way she'd curl into my shoulder without ever waking. I thought about the days she first called me her safe place. And now? Now I was the obstacle in her way, the weight she couldn't carry anymore, the ghost in the house. I had become furniture, silent, unseen, necessary only in function, never in feeling. I began to question whether I had made some quiet mistake years ago. Had I loved her too quietly? Had I given so much of myself that I forgot to teach her who I really was? Had I taught her to receive, but never how to give? The questions circled endlessly like moths around a dimming bulb. I didn't sleep that night, not because of her words alone, but because of what I didn't hear from her. No knock, no soft voice checking if I was okay, no moment of pause, nothing. The silence, which once had been a punishment from fate, had now become a choice, hers. A language she used fluently, one I had been forced to learn just to survive. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to hate her. I wanted to. I wanted to scream into her hallway, rattle the walls with my grief, throw every memory of bedtime stories and school recitals in her face. I wanted to ask, where did I lose you? When did I become this thing you tiptoe around instead of run toward? But I knew. Even if I had screamed, she wouldn't have heard me, not because my voice was gone, but because her ears were no longer tuned to the frequency of my pain. She had moved on, and I had stayed, like a photograph in a dusty frame, always present, rarely noticed. That was the night something changed, not in her, in me. Because as I sat there still, silent, screaming inside, I realized that hearing again wasn't the gift I thought it would be. It wasn't a bridge back to her. It was a mirror. And what I saw in that mirror was a man who still hoped. And hope, when it's all you have left, can either heal you or destroy you. I didn't know yet which one it would be. The morning air felt impossibly sharp, each breath a revelation. I woke before dawn, drawn by a sound I hadn't heard in years, a robin's trill. Slicing through the gloom of early light, I pressed my hand to the rough wood of the windowsill, heart thudding as the first droplets of sound rippled through me, fragile as crystal breaking. The world came rushing back in one glorious, terrifying flood. The distant hum of the refrigerator, the rustle of leaves against the glass, even the faint murmur of traffic on the street below. It was as if a dam inside my skull had shattered, and months, no, years of silence gushed free all at once. Tears filled my eyes as I stood there trembling, overwhelmed by the beauty and cruelty of it. I wanted to shout for joy, to laugh until I couldn't breathe, to call out my daughter's name and have her spin around in surprise. But something held me back. Fear, perhaps fear that this miracle would be snatched away, that turning and shouting would shatter its fragile magic. More than that, though, was a darker impulse. I needed to see her without the filter of pity or obligation. I needed to know who she was when she thought I was broken. So I let the sounds wash over me in silence. I dressed in the dim light, each footstep a new discovery fabric, whispering against skin, my own shoes creaking. I poured coffee and listened to the gentle hiss of the machine, savoring the simplest acts as if they were wonders. I moved through the house like a ghost, learning to walk again, reveling in the ordinary symphony of existence. When my daughter came downstairs, I didn't announce the miracle. She glanced over her shoulder, offering that polite, practiced smile she reserved for me now. She babbled about her day, about plans and errands, as if nothing had changed, and I watched her, heart clenched, because I saw the curves of her lips, the tired set of her shoulders, the same gestures I'd read on silent nights. I heard every word, every inflection, and I measured her fatigue, her hidden impatience, the slight tremor in her voice when she thought no one was listening. I realized then that the truth of her heart would only emerge when I remained patient, when I stayed quiet and let her guard down. This return of sound was a test, a chance to uncover the depth of her love or the degree of her indifference. I chose the lie of my continued deafness, not out of spite, but from a fierce, painful need for honesty. I would listen without her knowledge and discover the daughter I had lost, long before my hearing vanished. In that hush, filled with rediscovered noise, I made my decision. I would stay invisible until I understood her fully, until her true voice, unclouded by guilt or duty, revealed itself. Only then would I decide how to reveal the miracle that fate had handed me back. Over the next weeks, I lived in a world of secret echoes. Each morning I would tiptoe down the hall before anyone else stirred, heart pounding in anticipation of the gentle sounds of her routine, water running in the shower, the tap of her slippers on tile, and I'd press my ear against the doorframe, as if it were a sacred temple of truth. I discovered how she sighed when she thought no one was around, a low, weary sound that spoke of exhaustion I had never imagined, and I heard her laughter with friends through the cracked open window, the bright notes tinged with relief that I wasn't there. I learned her daily confessions, the tiny frustrations of traffic, the office gossip that made her roll her eyes, the way she muttered, "God, someday I'll just," before cutting herself off. Sometimes her fiancé's voice joined in, and I felt a stab of jealousy for the ordinary closeness they shared, their shoulders brushing as they leaned together over a recipe, the soft laughter that balanced her weariness like a lifeline. And sometimes I heard her talk to herself, brushing hair from her face in the mirror, admitting worries she'd never tell me, fear of moving too far away, guilt at loving her life more than she'd once loved me. Every hidden word was a dagger and a gift. A dagger because it revealed her reality. I was no longer her confidant, no longer the man she could trust with her rawest truth. I was an experiment, an unseen auditor of her heart's murmurings. But it was a gift, too, because in those stolen moments, I glimpsed the real her, vulnerable, unguarded, honest. The daughter I'd raised had grown into someone complex and brave, someone who carried burdens I never fully understood. I wandered through each day, balancing on the razor's edge of this illusion, grateful for every honest syllable that drifted to me, but haunted by the knowledge that her words, when addressed to me, had been rehearsed or withheld. I began scribbling fragments of her confessions in a notebook I hid in my jacket pocket, as if by collecting her unguarded phrases I could rebuild the bridge between us. The night I found a hastily scrawled pen doodle shaped like a small heart and the word sorry beside it written, I realized in a moment of quiet remorse. That night, I almost called her name, but I stayed silent, because I needed more. I needed to know whether her heart had truly grown cold or whether it still beat for me beneath layers of guilt and grief. And so I kept listening, day after hidden day, gathering each truth until I was certain I knew her again or until I was ready to let her go forever. The afternoon sun poured through the bay windows, turning dust motes into dancing fireflies, as the family crowded around the long oak table. Plates clinked, candle flames flickered, and laughter bubbled up like champagne. It was my birthday, one more year added to the ledger of my life, though lately age felt more like an accusation than a celebration. My daughter cleared her throat, standing with a crystal flute held aloft, the tiny bubbles racing upward like her words were about to escape. She smiled that practiced smile, the one I'd come to know in its many variations. The room hushed, almost imperceptibly, as if waiting for her to say something heartfelt. To my dad, she began, voice bright with irony, who can't hear me, thank God. A few stifled chuckles rippled around the table. My son-in-law grinned, raising his own glass in agreement. My grandchildren giggled, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension. My wife, bless her heart, gave me a nervous nod, as though she wished both to comfort me and to smooth over the awkwardness. I lifted my glass in return, a slow, deliberate motion giving my arm the slightest tremor, just enough to let them see I was present. I pressed my lips into a smile that felt like a mask tightening across my face. Inside, my chest constricted so fiercely it felt as though my ribs might crack. They saw a joke, a light-hearted jab at my expense, but what they swallowed with their laughter was the bitter truth of their relief, that I was still the man who didn't hear, still the silent fixture they could tease without guilt. I remembered past birthdays show she'd once thrown her arms around me, eyes shining with pure joy, how the table had overflowed with her laughter and warmth. She'd made cakes shaped like stories' castles, dragons, pet seach, one a gift of imagination and love. I remembered how proud she'd been to stand before the candles, cheeks flushed, toasting to my health with tears of gratitude. But today her words were a shield, a way to deflect any real feeling, a toast that cut deeper than any knife. I closed my eyes briefly, tasting the sweetness of wine layered over the metallic tang of pain. My throat tightened, words crowding near the surface until they screamed inside me. But I held them back. I had rehearsed this chapter of the lie I chose. I would not betray my secret now, not in front of them. So I drank. I let the wine slide down like liquid courage. I watched her face closely, searching for a crack in the veneer, something genuine. But all I saw was comfort, relief, and the practiced ease of someone who believed the barrier between us was unbreachable. When she sat back down, laughter resumed, and conversation spilled into the empty spaces between us. "Pass the potatoes," someone said. "Is that the new vase, Mom? Where's Grandpa's cake?" I sipped more wine, letting the room spin just enough to blur the edges, to pull me away from the sting of their amusement. And in that moment, I realized something profound. They had moved through life assuming I would always be the quiet observer, content with captions, with lip reading, with the shell of a father. But tonight, the shell was cracking. My heart bled behind my smile, a slow red tide that threatened to drown me. And yet, as the laughter echoed, I felt a fierce pulse of resolve. They thought they were celebrating me. They thought they were safe in their assumption that I remained deaf. They were so very wrong. I lingered in the living room long after the birthday plates were cleared, heart pounding with a secret rhythm I could barely contain. The house had settled into its nighttime hush. Soft creaks in the floorboards, the distant hum of the street lamp outside, and the faint rustle of curtains as a breeze whispered through the open window. In that stillness, I felt the weight of every moment I'd missed. Her laughter at bedtime, the rustle of her hair as she drifted to sleep, the soft cadence of her voice when she told me her dreams. I rose and crossed the room without a sound, my bare feet pressing into the rug like feathers. My daughter's bedroom door stood ajar, a sliver of light leaking into the corridor. Memories surged her as a little girl, curled in my arms, me humming the melody of "You Are My Sunshine," until her breaths grew steady. I closed my eyes and let the memory guide me, pressing my lips to a refrain I had carried in my bones for decades. At first it was a whisper as to tremor of air, a ghost of a tune. Then, as the words took shape on my breath, it grew bolder, filling the hallway like a long-lost fragrance. I let the song unfurl, each note trembling with longing and regret. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. Inside her room, I heard the faintest catch in her breath. The humming faltered as she froze, a single hand pressing against her chest, as if to still the shock of hearing a voice she thought had vanished forever. The melody hung between us, fragile and trembling, revealing my presence without a single footstep or whispered word. She didn't rush out to confront me. She didn't gasp or cry. Instead, I heard the soft scrape of the blanket as she sat up, then the slow, deliberate slide of her feet onto the floor. I held my breath, half expecting her to shout, to ask why I was humming in the dark, but she said nothing. After a moment that stretched into eternity, the melody faded from my lips, and I slipped back into the shadows. The silence returned, thicker this time, charged with electricity. I imagined her mind racing. Did he hear? Was I wrong to trust the silence? In the morning she would pass by me in the hallway, and perhaps our eyes would meet for an instant. She might tighten her shoulders, convinced it was my old hearing aid misfiring or an imagined echo from years past. But I knew the truth was alive inside her now, waking with every heartbeat she couldn't suppress. That one humming note had cracked her world open just enough for me to see the truth glimmer beneath. And as I retreated to my room, the weight of my secret pressed against my ribs, I realized the power had shifted. I was no longer the silent ghost in her life. I had a voice again, soft, unexpected, and unstoppable. In the wan light of early evening, the garden felt hollow, as though the world itself was holding its breath. I lingered by the stone path, pretending to admire the roses, while inside my chest a tempest raged. Their voices drifted from the patio, her and her fiancé speaking in low tones that carried on the breeze. Words meant for two, but now seized by my newly awakened ears. She sounded worried, tense, like a tightrope walker afraid of the fall. I heard the tremor in her voice as she confessed a secret fear. If I ever heard again, if the silence finally broke, she would be undone, because in her mind, my return to hearing meant reckoning, confrontation, the unearthing of truths she had buried. She believed I was finished, that the man I once was had died in the hush of that doctor's verdict. Done, she had whispered, the word heavy with relief. But I was not done, not by a long stretch. I stepped closer, each footfall measured and silent, as though I were conjuring myself back into her life. I watched her shoulders slump with relief, the way she leaned into his arm as though only he could steady her. And in that moment, I saw the full weight of my absence, the space I had occupied in her heart, now filled by guilt and perfunctory kindness, the hollow shell of filial duty. I remembered the man I used to be, the one who cheered at her dance recitals, who dried her tears when the world seemed too big, who taught her to ride a bike and then ran alongside until she pedaled away. That man still lived inside me, fiercer and more determined than ever. So I closed the distance between us in a single breath, not angrily, but with quiet resolve. I allowed her to see me standing there, eyes steady, ears open, heart unmasked. She froze, branches of wisteria framing her like penitents in a chapel. Her fiancé fell silent beside her, confusion and fear flickering across his face. No words, Caminon, were needed. My presence spoke more loudly than any confession or apology. In the charged stillness, I let her realize the truth. I was hearing every heartbeat, every falter in her voice, every regret she thought she hid. And in that final confirmation, tomorrow's reckoning now impossible to avoid, I felt the old power return, the power to choose my future, the power to demand honesty, the power to rebuild or to walk away. She had thought my story ended the day the doctors delivered their verdict, but that was only the prelude. The real story, my story, was just beginning. I sat behind the mahogany desk, fingers trembling as I slid the papers toward the lawyer. His office smelled of polished wood and old leather, a place where futures are decided and legacies are carved in ink. I watched his eyes flick from the title page of my revised will to my face, searching for hesitation. There was none. I had spent nights wrestling with my grief, anger, and hope until I reached a decision that felt like both justice and release. I updated my will that afternoon, erasing her name from every clause tied to fortune and replacing it with something that mattered more than money: purpose. Every cent I owned would go to a foundation for children with disabilities, those whose voices had been muted by the world, just as mine had been. I imagined them finding strength in each other, supported by the very resources I had once lacked. This would be my true gift, my final testament. Yet I couldn't leave her with nothing. A father's role is never fulfilled by wealth alone. So I instructed the lawyer to prepare a single envelope addressed to my daughter. Inside would be a letter, no checks, no grand gestures, only words. Words that carried every memory of laughter and lullabies, every lesson in courage, every moment when love had seemed to light the darkest rooms. When the lawyer asked if I wanted to explain my reasoning, I shook my head. I knew the sting of obligation in her voice when she spoke of me as a burden, and I wanted this act to speak louder than any courtroom drama or family confrontation. I wanted her to feel the weight of choice, the same choice I had wrestled with every day I remained silent in her life. I left the lawyer's office feeling lighter than I had in years. The weight of my estate, once a source of hidden anxiety, now felt like a beacon of change. I imagined the smiles of strangers' children who would receive support for therapies, devices, and hope. And I thought of my daughter holding that letter, the words I poured onto the page, confronting her with the man she had forgotten existed. That night, I sat at my old desk in the study and wrote the letter by hand, each sentence a heartbeat. My dearest daughter, this is not a punishment nor a reward. It is the story of my love for you, written in the ink of truth. I described our happiest days, our smallest routines, the moments when her laughter had been my world. I spoke of my pain and my forgiveness, of the bridges I hoped we could rebuild, and of the foundation born from both my loss and my regained hearing. By the time I sealed the envelope, tears blurred the penmanship. I didn't know if she would ever open it, if she could bear the reflection of her own words or the weight of my choices. But I knew I had given her something she could never take back, my truth, in every line. And in that act of finality, I felt my own heart shift. I was no longer a passive witness to her life or a silent prisoner of my past. I had reclaimed my story and offered her one last chance to reclaim hers. Boxes lined the hallway like silent witnesses to a life I was leaving behind. Each one held fragments of memory photo albums, her childhood drawings, the stack of board games we once played by lamplight. My footsteps sounded hollow against the hardwood as I carried the last box to the front door. She appeared in the foyer, silhouetted by afternoon sun, eyes wide with confusion and something softer concern, perhaps. In that moment, I saw the daughter I raised and the woman she had become standing in the same frame, two versions of her heart colliding in one look. "Why now? Where will you go?" she asked, voice tentative as if she feared the answer. I paused, feeling the weight of all the days I had stood still, of every silence that had widened between us like an endless canyon. I set the box down gently, dust motes dancing in the beams of light between us. And for the first time in months, I spoke. I heard everything. Those 3 words carried decades of love and pain, of secrets gathered in the dark and truths left unspoken. I watched her face falter, the confusion melting into something raw, shame, regret, sorrow. She backed away slightly as though the ground might give way beneath her. In the quiet that followed, I saw the memories woven into the house come alive in her eyes. Bedtime stories whispered in shadowy hallways, birthday cakes dusted in sprinkles, the sound of my voice humming her favorite lullaby. I saw the guilt when she realized I had listened, not just to her words, but to the spaces between them, the sighs, the apologies she never voiced, the exhaustion in her breath. I stepped toward her, not to close the distance, but to honor it. The space between us had grown, but it was not unbridgeable. I wanted her to feel the fullness of my return, not just to hearing, but to speaking truth. "I loved you more than silence," I continued, voice steady though my chest felt tight. "But I needed to know if you loved me too." Her shoulders trembled, and for a moment I thought she might collapse into tears. Instead, she turned away, pressing her hands to her face as silent sobs shook her frame. I didn't reach for her not yet. This unveiling was hers alone to face. Behind us, the boxes waited, ready to be moved into a new place where the echoes of the past would not follow so closely. I would leave this house our home, so she could choose whether to stay in the silence she had crafted or step into the sound of reconciliation. When she finally turned back, her eyes glistened with unshed tears. I put on my coat, my heart both heavy and unburdened. In the doorway, I paused one last time and offered a quiet promise. "I'm here and I'm listening." Then I walked out, leaving behind furniture and walls, and a lifetime of unspoken words, but carrying with me the chance for a new beginning, one built on honesty, on shared sound, and on the fragile hope that love can heal what silence has broken. The moment I closed the door behind me, the quiet shattered like glass under a heel. Her screams followed raw, jagged cries that ripped through the evening air and into the hallway where we had once laughed together. I didn't need to turn around. I could feel the tremor of her heartbreak rolling through the walls. Tears flooded freely as she confronted me on the threshold. Her voice cracked, tears stinging her cheeks. "You're lying!" she cried, every syllable a desperate stab. Denial tangled with rage as she stepped forward, eyes blazing. The woman who had once clung to me in childhood was gone, replaced by someone wounded and furious. I stood still, chest tight, as the memory of every silent betrayal pressed against my ribs. I remembered her words in the garden, her toasts in the dining room, her half-whispers with her fiancé, each one breaking a piece of something I had never thought could break. "No," I said, my voice low but unmistakable. "You are." It wasn't an accusation. It was the reflection of her own truth. The realization struck her like a thunderclap. Her shoulders slumped, as if a hidden weight had finally been dropped. The fiery defiance in her eyes cooled, replaced by shock and sorrow. Behind her, the hallway light spilled onto her fiancé's form. He sat on the bottom step of the staircase, head bowed, as if he could shrink away from the moment. He looked up for a heartbeat, eyes full of regret, and then bowed his head again. He didn't follow us. He didn't try to comfort or to plead. His silence spoke volumes. He knew the depth of her cruelty, and he was ashamed he had ever joined in. She staggered back a step, hunched over as if the weight of what she'd lost had finally crushed her. I could see the rapid rise and fall of her chest as she fought for breath. The tears continued until even the air seemed too heavy to hold them. I wanted to reach out, wanted to gather her in my arms and whisper that I forgave her, that I still loved the little girl who once called me hero. But in that moment, the line between forgiveness and forgetting blurred. Could I erase the pain that her words had inflicted? Could she erase the months of indifference she had etched into my life? I realized as I stood there that some illusions, once shattered, never quite mend the same way again. The home we shared would always carry the crack of betrayal, however carefully we tried to hide it. Still, I didn't move. I watched her unravel, saw the agony she had stored in every polite smile and strained conversation pour out all at once. And I felt a deep compassion for her confusion, for her youthful fear of facing true loss, for the child who had never learned how to love without conditions. "I'm not lying," I whispered softly, though she may have been too lost in grief to hear. "But I forgive you. I always have." Then I turned and walked down the path, leaving behind tears and echoes of denial. Behind me, her sobs continued, and the front door stood ajar, a silent invitation or a final goodbye. The world shifted beneath my feet, but for the first time in a long time, my heart felt something clear: resolve. The illusions were shattered, yes, but on those fractured pieces, a new truth could be built, one that neither of us would ever take for granted again. The envelope lay on her dresser for days, weighty and untouched, until one afternoon, sunlight slanted through the blinds and landed on its pale cream surface like an invitation or a reckoning. She picked it up with hesitant fingers, the paper crinkling beneath her thumb as if protesting its own silence. Inside, the stationery bore my neat handwriting, each loop and line trembling with the emotion I had poured into every word. She paused before unfolding the pages, as though bracing herself for the full force of truth. The first sentences were gentle reminders, memories of scraped knees soothed at midnight, of bedtime lullabies humming through dim hallways, of laughter rippling through birthday cakes, and mornings spent chasing the dawn. But beneath the warmth of recollection lay the sharper tread of regret, each paragraph tracing the slow fracture of our bond with clinical precision. "I raised you with love," the letter began, voice never wavering, even when the words threatened to choke me. She read, as I remembered teaching her to read, my finger underlining each line of the alphabet until her bright eyes filled with wonder. But now those same eyes filled with tears as she recognized the next line. "You repaid it with convenience." Convenience, a cold admission of what she had become in my silence. A daughter who found it easier to treat me like a task than a man. How carefully she once spoke to me, balancing love and apology on her tongue, and how easily she had let that care slip away when she assumed I could not hear. Her fingers trembled as she turned the page to the final passage, where I laid out my choices with unwavering clarity. I had left her no inheritance of wealth, only a foundation built from my estate, for children whose silence couldn't be undone by a miracle. But for her, I had prepared this letter, a different kind of inheritance, the opportunity to become better. She paused again, reading the words aloud in her mind: "Use it, or lose more than me." The sentence echoed in the stillness of her room, reverberating through every memory and every unspoken apology. In that moment, she realized that the chance I offered was not about money or possessions. It was about redemption, about reclaiming the compassion and respect she had once offered so freely. Tears fell as she pressed the letter to her chest, as though trying to absorb the weight of both my hurt and my forgiveness. Her world had tilted on its axis the day I revealed I could hear, but now it shifted once more under the gravity of my choice, to let her face the consequences of her words. Outside, a robin song carried through the open window, its trill a reminder of the morning when I first heard again. She listened, and for the first time in months, she heard not only the bird, but the pulse of her own heart speeding with remorse. The letter lay spread across the dresser, its edges marked by tears and regret. She would soon come to understand that lost fortunes can be rebuilt, but lost trust is a far harder architecture to restore. And as the sunlight faded behind the blinds, she knew that her true inheritance would not be measured in coins, but in the quiet chance to mend what had been broken before she lost more than even silence could steal. The sun had just begun its descent when I found myself on the weathered wooden railing of the seaside pier, the salt-tinged breeze carrying the steady cadences of the ocean. Here, far from the echoing halls of the house I once shared with my daughter, the world spoke a language I no longer feared. Waves thundered against the pilings in timeless rhythm, as though the sea itself were reminding me that life moves forward, unstoppable and grand. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries slicing through the sky like triumphs of freedom. In the distance, children's laughter drifted from a sandy cove, bright, unguarded joy that reminded me how sound can heal. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, letting the chorus of life wash over me. Each roar of surf felt like a drumbeat in my chest, declaring that I was here, fully present, no longer a ghost in the corridors of my own existence. I let the wind carry away the remnants of old regrets, the guilt that had knotted my shoulders for too long. In its place grew something new, a quiet conviction that my worth was not defined by another's words or approval, but by the steady pulse of my own resilience and love. On the horizon, a small fishing boat bobbed gently, its solitary silhouette a testament to perseverance. I thought of my daughter, of the fractures we endured, of the letters she read too late, of the tears and the silence that had both built walls and, ultimately, paved the way for this moment of clarity. I hoped she would find her own peace, hear the world's symphony once more, and learn to measure her value not by convenience, but by compassion. But my story had reached its own conclusion, and it wasn't one of bitterness or abandonment. It was a story of survival, of secrets unearthed and truths reclaimed. As I sat there, legs dangling above the restless water, I realized that peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the freedom to choose which sounds to carry in your heart. A wave crashed against the pier, spraying droplets that caught the dying light like diamonds. I smiled, feeling its cool touch on my skin and welcoming whatever the future might bring. The day I regained my hearing was not the end of my journey, but the beginning of a new symphony, one composed of self-respect, hope, and love unbound by silence. And for the first time in years, as the sea sang its endless song, I listened not to apologies or echoes of past pain, but to the sound of my own worth. In that melody, I found home,